Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my December 2025 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I am filming this on December 31st, however, who knows how long it's going to take to edit this and get it uploaded for you, so probably Happy New Year! As always, I'm going to start with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to skip over anything or go back to anything, all of that is down below. While you're checking out the description section, make sure that you're subscribed because sometimes YouTube likes to unsubscribe people just for funsies, and why not like the video? That would be very nice of you. As a reminder, I will be updating my bingo board from hell at the end, letting you know if I happen to get any bingos this year, and of course I'll be going over what I read for the Queer Lit Readathon. Additionally, and this is something I've never done before, maybe I'll go over some of the statistics for the year as a whole, because I have that spreadsheet, it has the graphics. Why not give you some extra stats? Because I know you're nerds, otherwise you wouldn't be here. In December, I read 19 books and DNF'd one additional book for a total of 6,283 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 2,714 of those pages were actually about 85 hours of audio. Also, the DNF shows up in the adult, nonfiction, and anthology categories, so if you're doing any of the math later, that's how that factored in. The age breakdown for these books was 12 adult books, 4 YA books, 3 middle grade books, and 1 kids book. I read 15 novels, 3 anthologies, 1 graphic novel, and 1 picture book. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was fantasy, nonfiction, and mystery thriller, followed by contemporary, historical fiction, romance, and science fantasy. If you adjust by page count, not too much changes. Almost all of these were from the library, but I did read one from a chain bookstore and another I already owned. I read 8 audiobooks, 7 hardcovers, and 5 paperbacks. About half my books were in the 300 to 399 page range, and most were from this decade. When it comes to the gender of authors, more than half were women, and just under half of the protagonists were women. In terms of setting, just under half were set in the US, but I also had books set in the UK, other worlds, Canada, Australia, France, and Argentina. In terms of diversity of subject matter, half were intersectional, another 40% were just queer, 1 dealt with disability, and 1 had no diversity to speak of. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 DNF, which is what that 0-star rating always means, 1 3-star read, 6 3.5-star reads, 10 4-star reads, and 2 5-star reads. Let's start with the lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? The book that I DNF'd this month after about 34 pages was IRL, Finding Realness, Meaning, and Belonging in Our Digital Lives. Now this one originally I was picking up for a buddy read, and then that buddy read fell through, so when I started reading it I was like, well, if I'm not really enjoying this I don't have to keep reading it. And it wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. It was a lot more personal anecdotes than actually talking about people being online and how you can get your feelings hurt by random strangers on the internet and that type of thing. Maybe that kind of context would have come up later in the book, but I just wasn't really feeling it, so I DNF'd. It's fine. My 3-star read this month was 3 Holidays and a Wedding. This is the cute, wintry book that I decided to read around the Christmas period. This one covers a time frame where in 2000 there was Christmas, there was Ramadan, and there was Hanukkah all around the same time. And we have 2 different characters who are flying from the same place, and they're both trying to get to Toronto for different reasons, but their plane actually has to land early in this really, really small Canadian town in Ontario. It's called Snow Falls. I haven't even actually looked up to see if this place actually exists. Somebody on Pagebound said that their headcanon is this is just one of those spaces that exists for people when they need it to exist, and exists in a way where whatever they need to happen in that town is going to happen. I completely agree with that headcanon, especially when it comes to what happened with the theater stuff. One of our characters is Miriam. She is Muslim, her sister is getting married, and has decided she's going to marry this guy that she met through Doctors Without Borders on December 25th in Toronto. However, because she's away doing the doctoring, Miriam has actually had to be the one to plan all of this with the in-laws who are in Toronto. They're flying from Denver, by the way. And it's been a really stressful time. Miriam ends up having to do kind of all the scheduling and all of the boring things for her family, which doesn't really leave time for the things that she wants in life. Our other point of view character is Anna. Now, growing growing up, she actually used to celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah because her stepmother was Jewish, so they would kind of mix these two holidays together. However, her dad died a couple of years ago, and her stepmother is actually remarried to somebody else quite quickly, so it feels like she's lost both of these people, and because she's not actually Jewish, she feels weird about celebrating Hanukkah, even though she grew up celebrating Hanukkah and really wants to continue that tradition. These two characters are on a plane together. They don't have the best of meetings, but they end up staying in the same place in this small town, and shenanigans ensue. I kind of like these books where you get kind of multiple different romances happening, because you have Anna, who has a boyfriend, but you know things aren't going great with it. You have Miriam, who you know something happened to her in her past, and the guy she had a crush on when she was 12 is on the plane and is going to her sister's wedding, and that's just a whole big thing. And then you have this romance of these people who want to get married on December 25th and then go back to Doctors Without Bordering. It is a fun premise. I liked how he mixed all these cultures together. I don't believe that this small town actually exists, but maybe it actually does. I have no idea. But what I can tell you is if there is a holiday tradition to every year do a holiday hoopla on December 25th, and it's like the 22nd and nobody's even written a script yet, that makes no goddamn sense. On to my 3.5 star reads, the first one being the picture book that I read for the Queer Lit Readathon, and that's called Introducing Teddy. This is about a little kid who has a teddy bear, and one day the teddy bear is like, hey, I actually need to tell you, I'm a girl Teddy and not a boy Teddy. I hope we can still be friends. And of course the kid is like, yeah, of course we can still be friends. I just care that we're friends. And then the kid goes on to tell friends and family that this is a girl Teddy now, and this is the new name the Teddy's going by, and it's just lovely. Something else I read for the Queer Lit Readathon, although it wasn't originally on my TBR, was Fearless and Free. This is Josephine Baker's autobiography, but it's written in an interesting way because the person who actually wrote this down and actually recorded these conversations is not Josephine Baker. I actually can't remember his name. I wish his name was actually on the book. That would be really helpful. I think his name was Mr. Sauvage. I can't remember his first name. But over about 20 years, he was doing interviews with her in her dressing room and that type of thing. And this reads very much like you're just sitting in the dressing room with her and she's telling you stories. This was widely interesting, although I feel like there is so much more to all of these stories that you don't quite get through this medium, but it was interesting nonetheless. Taking a break from Queer Lit Readathon reads for a second, I also read The Battle of the Labyrinth, which I believe is the fourth in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. We've gotten to the part in the series where it's introducing more mythical creatures and gods from Greek mythology that I didn't know than I have heard of before. So I think we kind of used up all the ones that I really kind of knew about in the third ones, and now we're introducing more characters that I'm like, I've never heard of that one before, but okay. There is a little bit of a formula to these books in that there's always an adventure that they go on, and then there's always some creature or some entity that they're fighting. Why are the loud things going by right now? And that gets a little bit repetitive in my brain just because I'm like, okay, I know that like they're gonna fight something, it's gonna be fine. They're gonna fight something, it's gonna be fine. Sometimes somebody gets captured or that type of thing, but I didn't really pay as close attention to this one as I probably should have, probably because we're in the middle of the series and that happens sometimes. Next, another book I picked up for the Queer Lit Readathon is The Confessions of Frannie Langton. This is also a book I've been meaning to pick up since it was published because one of my subscribers was like, hey, I think you'd really like this. So I went into it knowing it's historical fiction about this woman who was enslaved in Jamaica and she eventually goes to the UK and then she's on trial for killing the people she works for. But she swears she couldn't have done it because she was actually in love with the mistress of the house who is now deceased. This is one of those books where I thought it was more so going to focus on this murder mystery aspect and who actually did the murdering, but we kind of got to that point and then we went back to the beginning of her life and saw what it was like growing up in Jamaica and had some reveals about her parentage and different things that were happening while she was there and trauma that ensued from these various events. So I enjoyed it and I enjoyed the writing style, but it wasn't exactly what I thought I was getting myself into. Next, from Argentina, we have Thirst. Now this is a book that is about a vampire who is turned somewhere in Europe and that eventually has to leave Europe because of reasons and ends up going on a boat to Argentina and spending a lot of time there. Eventually we get a POV switch to this other woman who lives in Argentina hundreds of years after we met this first character, and their paths will eventually collide and what that looks like. It was creepy and it was sapphic and you just kind of wanted to know what was gonna happen. I just kept wanting to know, how is this gonna go? The week before the Queer Lit Readathon, I read Out of Salem. This is an interesting one set in a world where different mythological creatures exist. So one of our main characters is a zombie, there's werewolves, there's fae, and in this world, which is set around the 90s in the United States, everyone who's not a regular human is looked down upon. There are certain regulations, such as if a zombie is not attached to a certain person and that person is looking after them, then you can just go ahead and kill that zombie. You know, regulations of that nature. Also, there's a lot of people that feel like all werewolves are dangerous and they look down on them, and they're trying to get werewolves much more contained and putting them on lists. It's that type of world. So we've got these two characters, one's a zombie, one is a werewolf. They're just trying to live their lives, and that becomes increasingly more difficult as the time goes on. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being a very short book that I read the other day called The Serviceberry. This one is interesting because it takes a look at the gift economy and economies in general and different economic models, but through the lens of ecology, and specifically the ecology of serviceberries. Serviceberries are something given freely from the environment. They grow, different people or creatures eat them. They take on nutrients from the environment, and it's kind of cyclical. And they don't go, oh, you've taken 3 of my berries, you need to give me back exactly this much in exchange. It's more of a gift that is provided. This is obviously elaborated on in a much more eloquent way by the author, but that's the gist of it, and this is a book that really made me think. Next we have Just Shy of Ordinary. This is about a non-binary kid named Shy, who has decided that they want to go to public school for the first time so they can kind of create a routine for themselves, because they've had this problem where they've started actually picking at their skin to the point where they need to cover it up so nobody who they live with knows about it. And they read that if they create a routine, then maybe they will become too busy to actually be doing this activity, and it will clear up and they won't have to like ask their mom for help or anything like that. So they go to school, they get this project where they have to write 10 personal essays, and at first they want to talk about pronouns because nobody at school actually knows that they're non-binary yet. But they figure they probably can't talk about that for 10 essays, so they decide to look into their Jewish heritage because their grandparents are Jewish, their mother grew up Jewish, but they don't have that tradition, so they want to know more about that life. There's just something about kids of this age range in these types of books going through all of these different things that I really love reading about, and I learned so much because obviously they're going through things that I never went through, but then they are also going through kind of the emotions and growing up that everybody, hopefully, if you live long enough, goes through. Speaking of kids going through things, I also read a graphic novel called Another Kind. This one centers 6 different kids, all who are some different form of cryptid or otherworldly person. And one of the most fun things is actually going through this and getting all of their backstories and being like, oh yeah, this one's a werebear and this one's a yeti, and learning a little bit about how they all ended up in this secret underground bunker together and why it seems like somebody has found them and why they end up having to leave this bunker for a different location, and of course that goes sideways. The characters in this were delightful. The art was absolutely beautiful. I really enjoyed my time with this one. Next, we have What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, which I believe is the first in a series. I also believe it's kind of a reworking of The Fall of the House of Usher, although I haven't read that, so I don't know for sure. However, with the naming scheme and this kind of being a gothic, dark, creepy thing, I think I'm on the money. I just haven't looked it up. This is about a non-binary soldier who has gotten a letter from a friend saying, hey, my sister's probably going to die soon, so if you want to come visit before that happens, that's a good idea. So they show up, and things are very weird around this family home. That's all I can really tell you because this is a very, very short book, and I want you to go into this knowing as little as possible, just so you can get the whole creep factor fed to you in the way that I feel like you should have it, which is the way the book lays it out. Next, we have Bad in the Blood. This is another book I picked up for the Queer Lit Readathon, and this one has to do with this world where some people are fae, some people aren't. The kind of vibe around this is like 1920s New York kind of style, except for it's in a fantasy world. The 2 characters we follow in this are step-siblings, and they actually have the same birthday, which is weird, because they didn't actually know each other for the first 5 years of their lives. Also, on your 18th birthday is when you get to decide what your name is and what gender you are. So one of them has just declared themselves as a boy, and one of them has just declared themselves as a girl. This is also one of those books that has a little bit of mixed media in it, so it was a little bit confusing at the beginning because there was a family tree, and then we had the first chapter where you knew these kids were eventually going to be the people on the family tree, and it feels like you should have been given the family tree later, because having that family tree just made it more confusing to figure out the relationships between these characters before something disastrous happened. There's also this element of a detective agency in this, because one of the kids' dad used to be in a detective agency with his sister, and they're twins. And then because of reasons you find out when you read this book, that detective agency still exists, but the twins don't really run it anymore, and one of these two siblings that we're actually focusing on is working there, but not as a detective. However, a death occurs and he has to figure out who done it, because otherwise he's afraid that his sister is going to be blamed for it. This was definitely an interesting world, a little bit difficult to get into at the beginning, but once you kind of figure out how it's all structured, it makes a little bit more sense, and then you're just along for the ride. Next, we have something else I read for the Queer Lit Readathon, which is Spellhacker. I've been meaning to read this since it came out, so I'm glad I finally got around to it. This one is about these group of kids who do these heists, and they steal this thing called Maz. Maz is basically magic that comes from the earth. There's different forms of it, and you can use the different forms of it to do different things. This used to be a commodity that anyone could take, but now it's been corporatized, so they actually steal it from corporations and sell it to the highest bidder. However, as we meet them, they're on their final heist ever, because 3 out of 4 of these people are actually going off to university. And our main character, our point of view character, is the only one who's not planning to leave, and they're kind of feeling really left behind because everybody else is just going to forget about them. However, once they get through this one last heist, of course, there is an option to do another one last heist, and they really want to do it because they will be set for life with that money. But is it going to be easy? Of course not. It wouldn't be a heist book if it was easy. I suppose it would technically be a heist book if there was a heist in it and it was easy, but that's no fun. There were definitely twists in this that I saw coming, but that's because I've read books before. Next, we have a book that I read mostly for the vibes, and that's Gideon the Ninth. I finally read Lesbian Necromancers in Space. And also, my best friend watched my last video where I talked about this and was like, oh, science fantasy? I don't really like science fantasy. I like fantasy. Let me tell you, the only science thing about this is it happens to be set on different planets. That's really not even focused on at all. So Taryn, please just read these books. I think you would enjoy them, or at least this first one. I haven't read the other ones. This one is about a swordswoman who has to work for the person who runs the planet that she works on, and then they end up having to go to a different place for this collegiate necromancer event that's happening. That's all you really need to know. There's a lot of characters coming from a lot of different worlds, but all the worlds seem to be fairly the same, at least when it comes to these characters, because all of them are necromancers, or the swords of the necromancers, basically. And then something happens, they have to solve what's going on in this place. It's a good fun time. But also, you know, as creepy as you would expect given that we're talking about necromancers and sword fighting. Next, we have recommended reading. This is about a guy who's decided he's going to have the best summer ever between high school and university, and he's decided part of the best summer ever is finally getting together with this guy that he's been flirting with quite a bit at work. So what does he do? He creates a flash mob. And does that go well for him? No. In fact, not only does he not get the guy, this actually puts his scholarship at risk for the school, and he ends up losing that job and has to work at the other bookstore in town. However, he's going to have to really try to salvage this summer and work really hard to be able to pick himself up from this situation. You know me, I love a bookish book. I love a book set in a bookstore. I love characters who love books, so of course I really enjoyed this one. Next, we have A Queer Case, which is the first in a new mystery series. This one is set in about the 1920s in the UK, and the main character in this one is a gay man, and obviously you have to be very under the radar about that. One day while he's out for a walk, he meets up with his friend he went to university with. They actually shared a kiss at one point, so he's very interested in maybe doing that again, and he's invited to come along to a family event so he can suss out this friend's new stepmother, because she's about their age, and the friend is like, I'm pretty sure she's just trying to steal my inheritance, and if you can figure out a way to make my dad notice that, that would be great. However, this turns into a much bigger situation, and then our character definitely has to figure out what happened, otherwise he's probably going to be blamed for something. I really enjoyed this. There are also some side characters that were very interesting, and I'm interested to see where the series goes from here. This one just came out this year though, so I feel like I'm probably going to have to wait a little while. Finally, for my 4 stars, I read Rebecca, which is not something I would have picked up if it weren't for the fact that it was on a page-bound quest. This is one of those books where I know is really, really long, and it's a classic or whatever, but I was like, okay, I'll finally get around to it. And the way that I try to get into these types of books is listening to them as audiobooks, because if there's any vernacular I'm not familiar with, I can usually understand it when it's read to me, or at least understand it enough to continue with the story. To my surprise, the language in this was actually fairly easy to understand, and this was a fascinating book. This is all about this girl who we don't actually ever know her name, but she meets this very rich man while she's working staying at this location, and they end up getting together. Now, his first wife died a little while ago, and she is the titular character, and she's constantly comparing herself to this ghost in their life, which is Rebecca. And I don't want to tell you much more than that, because if you've read it before, you know what I'm talking about, and there are some reveals in this that I didn't see coming, and I thought this was really, really well written. If you've never read it before and you've been intimidated by it, I highly suggest actually reading it, because I really ended up enjoying this one. Finally, for my 5-star reads, I have 2 of them, and it's really hard to say which one's first and which one's second, but I have to talk about one of these first, so we'll say the penultimate book for this list is Human Rights. This is the 3rd in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven trilogy, although there's also a prequel book, which the library just told me I can take out now, so I'm going to have to pick that up and listen to that in the new year. And because this is the 3rd in a series and the conclusion, I can't really tell you too much, besides when we start out the series, we're talking about these 5 different witches that grew up together, and every once in a while somebody in this world of magic decides, hey, I have magic, I could take over the world, and then there's usually a war and they have to stop that person. That happened about 10 years previous to the plotline of the first book, and there's still ramifications from that situation, and we're definitely continuing to see those ramifications all the way through this book, to the point where it's like, are we now going to have another war? Maybe. That's all I'm going to say. I really enjoyed this series. It feels like a series I'm going to have to reread at some point, because I feel like there's even more little things that I could pick up upon reread. And that's not something I usually put the effort in to do with series, but I really want to reread this one. The other 5-star book that I want to talk about is Dead and Breakfast. This is the first in a mystery series where our main character is a vampire. He owns a bed and breakfast with his husband. They are in a small town called Trident Falls in Oregon, and sometimes paranormal people are kind of looked down upon by the locals, but there's definitely paranormal people in this town. They may be the only 2 vampires, but there's definitely a werewolf who owns a coffee shop, there's a fae who works as the coroner, there's other people about. However, somebody ends up dead in their garden, and he feels like he has to solve this case, otherwise he or his husband is going to go down for it. This is a book that is incredibly campy. It really leans into different puns, and I just absolutely loved that. We also got a lot of different character work. We also have this amateur detective style, because he's always kind of written things down about people. So he's putting this talent for details he has to good use, and it seems like that's going to continue into other books. And this one, again, just came out this year, so I'm gonna have to wait some time, but I'm happy to do so. To wrap up the Queer Lit Readathon, I read 8 books, which covered all 16 prompts. This is what that looked like. And as a little bit of an announcement, I did make a community post and I put it on Instagram, but just to let you know, if you're this far in this video, you probably already know, but next year, rounds 17 and 18 of the Queer Lit Readathon will both be month-long rounds. People have asked, people are often a little bit busy in December, whether it be the holidays or midterms or anything like that. So I've just decided to extend the 18th round to an entire month instead of just being 1 week. Additionally, we have the bingo board from hell. How did I do? I did make 1 bingo. I had this bingo last month. There were a couple of things I added to a couple of these squares this month, but I wasn't able to actually make any more bingos. Am I a little bit upset by that? Yes, but only a minuscule amount. And at this point, I'm currently trying to figure out what's going to be on the 2026 bingo board. So if you have any challenges in particular you think I should take up, please let me know about them. Overall though, I feel like I did a pretty decent job. Obviously there were some squares that I did not work my hardest on, but that also means that I've kind of pointed out to myself that I really don't need to be buying Book of the Month books unless they happen to have a book that I'm already interested in getting. So I'll give myself that grace, but I've already skipped January, for example, so we'll see if they ever come up with something that I'm actually really interested in getting again. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. Also, there's 9 years of content on there, so almost 2,000 books at this point, with just a rough count of how many books I read in a year, because I read over 200 this year and it's usually around 200. It's somewhere between like 160 and 269 is my average. So we're getting to almost 2,000 books. There are a few rereads in there, but not enough to mess up the stats too much. Also, I did say I'd give you some of the stats for the year as a whole, so I read 214 books and I DNF'd another 3 books. I also read some short stories that I didn't put on my spreadsheet, but they're definitely on my page bound. So everywhere you track is going to be a little bit different, but I'm pretty sure Based on my spreadsheet, I read 214 books, which is a pretty good year. If you look at my genres, 20% were contemporary. We also had a lot of nonfiction and fantasy, historical fiction and horror, which is great to see, and then a ton of other genres, because why not? You can also see that 92 of these books were audiobooks, 55 were hardcovers, 55 were paperbacks, and another 13 were ebooks. For the length of things, 153 of these were novels, 34 were anthologies, 4 were novellas, 2 were short stories that I did put on here, and both of those were Edgar Allan Poe, I'm pretty sure. There was a picture book, there was a novella, there was 21 graphic novels. And for the year overall, 86% were from the library, and then books from Book of the Month or NetGalley or books I already owned or various little things like that. As for star ratings, I'm just amazed that I read 80 4-star books. Like, I do understand that is the most common thing that I will give a book. It's usually a 4-star unless there was something wrong with it or unless I really, really loved it. So that is my most common, but 80 4-star books, that sounds like a great year to me. Also, it's kind of fun to look at how many books I read per month. There's definitely a bump towards the middle of the year, and juxtapose that to pages read per month, so that's fun. Overall, just over half of these books were set in the United States, but I also had books set in Canada, the UK, other worlds, and then various other countries, to the point where it's just showing me random little slivers and it's not actually telling me which countries they were, which is fun. Although if you look at this map that's also populated, you see a little bit more of the world covered, which is cool. And let's end it off on diversity of subject matter. I read a lot of stuff that you classify as diverse. 11% didn't have any diversity to speak of, but everything else had a little bit of something, which is what I'm going for. If you've read any of these, or you now want to read any of these, please let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down in the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment, but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!